Lesson 6. The book is Vistas, and the name of the lesson is On the Face of It. And this chapter is written by Susan. I think let's start with that chapter yesterday. Start a recap of yesterday's lecture first. On the Face of It. Title is 100% correct. It highlights multi-meanings. On the face of it. Very clear. Yesterday, I had told you the first logic behind this title. And today, you should be able to recognize one more. That is, on the face of it means appearance. APPEARANCE. And if we look at plural of it, it is appearances. Very clear. Author, Susan Hill. English writer, English author. She is an English author. And if we look at her works, she has done a lot of assignments of fiction and non-fiction. I think very clear about fiction and non-fiction, there is no doubt in that. So, already done micro overview of the story. So just look at the recap. Here we will be able to look at an old man, Mr. Lamb, and a teenager boy, Derek or Danny. Both were sufferers. Why were they sufferers? Because they were suffering from physical disability. Mr. Lamb was with tin leg, as he had lost his actual leg in the war. On the other hand, the boy, Derek or Derry, was a big sufferer because to some accident, he had lost one part of picture of Mr. Lamb, an old man. He was positive. And if we look at small guy, he was very negative. He was extremely pessimistic. He had become pessimistic due to his handicap. Very clear up to this particular point, there is no doubt in that. I think very about my view of the story. And if we look at this particular play, we will find Mr. Lamb giving guidelines to that small guy. To accept that nobody can change it. So far as the case of Derek was concerned, nobody was able to upgrade his physical outcome. And on the other hand, nobody was able to just look at or just eliminate the loss of Mr. Lamb. He was also a big sufferer because he was with tin leg. Very clear here that that old man was giving guideline to that guy to just look at the positive side. Just guiding that fellow to count his blessings. I think very clear up to this particular point, there's no doubt in that. So now just look at, before moving forward, let us look at the theme of this particular chapter. Well, that theme of this chapter, particularly this play, highlights very important theme, very significant theme. It highlights sense of loss, sense of isolation. I think very clear up to this particular point. First sub-theme, sense of loss. Second sub-theme, sense of isolation. And if we look at the entire theme of this particular play, that is, how can we overcome such type of losses or such type of isolations. And one more theme is there, that is, appearances are always deceptive. Being very clear up to this particular point, you are able to look at two themes so far as this play is concerned. So we had already done before you read. We look at this particular small paragraph highlights that this play is featuring with an old man, that is Mr. Lamb, and a small guy, Mr. Derek. That boy had met that old man in old man's garden, in his garden, farmer's garden, I think very clear. The old man wanted to extend his hand of friendship. In order to make that particular boy a complete personality, he had extended his hand for friendship. But that guy was withdrawn and defiant. And I had told you yesterday, it means rebellious kind, pessimistic, arrogant, withdrawn and defiant. I think very clear up to this particular point. He never ever wanted to be friend of anybody. He never ever wanted to talk to anybody due to his handicap. So what is the bond that unites the two? Now the question is, why that old man wanted to give that small guy a great lesson by extending his hand for friendship? I think very clear up to this particular point. There is no doubt in that. You are able to look at this particular query, and answer or reply of this query will be there in this particular play, and we will be able to search it out very early. So now just look at, already done with scene 1. There are 3 scenes. Scene 1 is a principal scene. It's a basic interaction between Mr. Lamb and Derek. And if we interpret scene 2, the interaction of Derek with his mother. And third scene will again bring us in the garden of Mr. Lamb. Now let us start with this principal or main scene we had already done, but I want to look at the recap of that because it's a new chapter. I want you people to be very careful, very careful. Before starting the lesson, I will let you remember that particular point. I think in standard 10th, you must have done poem, the ball poem. In that particular poem, you must have learned a great lesson. What was the lesson? Is you must be able to bear the epistemology of loss. Very clear up to this particular point. You must be able to recall the particular poem, and in that particular poem, small guy had lost his ball. The poet could be able to purchase new ball, but he had not purchased. The reason behind that was he wanted that guy to learn very important life skill. And that life skill is a person must be able to just tolerate the losses. If we are born on this particular earth, we have to face losses also. Every time we cannot be able to get the positive side of our life. No doubt, benefits will also be there, but losses are also a part of our life. When we suffer from any loss, we become pessimistic. Very clear up to this particular point, there is no doubt in that. So, if we look at any benefit, we become very optimistic. We must be able to maintain the balance. I think very clear up to this particular point. You are able to look at this particular point that at this particular moment, we're able to recognize the fact to bear the epistemology of loss. So that is why he had become extremely pessimistic. And on the contrary, that particular old man, Mr. Lamb, was with keen sense of basics. What was the basics? I think the basics was to bear the losses. So that is why he had remained optimistic even after a great loss. What was a great loss? The loss of his leg. Very clear up to this particular point. Let us move. If we look at the basics of scene 1, physical appearance of scene 1, it is seen with Mr. Lamb's garden, and just look at chirping of birds. Sound of chirping of birds is there. Not in a frequent way, it's occasional. And one more sound, that is tree leaves rustling. Very clear up to this particular point. Sound of rustling of tree leaves. I think very clear. So Derry's footsteps were heard as he walked very slowly and carefully. Very clear up to this particular point, there is no doubt in that. Here it means hesitantly. Through the long grass, he pauses. Very clear up to this particular point, he was just pausing through long grass. I think very clear, he was moving in a very different way. Then he walks again, and accidentally he was able to hear the noise of Mr. Lamb. As he is close at hand. Note down this idiom, dear students, close at hand. It means be near to anybody. You are well aware about idiom and phrase. So again, we have to look at this. Close at hand is an idiom. Told you the details of idiom and phrase my previous chapter. Very clear up to this particular point. Close at hand, figurative language. Person is able to recognize the meaning of this particular idiom only if he or she is able to peep deep into this particular idiom. Very clear. And there is shocked. Startled here means shocked. Very clear up to this particular point. Now let us start, Mr. Lamb. Mind the apple. Just look at the instruction of Mr. Lamb. Mr. Lamb was instructing Derry. He must be able to move properly. Why was the instruction given by that particular fellow? The reason behind that was he never wanted that apples would be in crushed state or in negative state. Because apple had fallen on long grass due to windfall. I think very clear up to this particular point. So that is why he had seen that guy. He had instructed that particular guy to move properly. Just look at response. Derry was just inquiring in a very different way. Because he was startled to look at that particular sound. Voice of Mr. Lamb, instruction of Mr. Lamb. He had entered in the garden to think that particular point, that garden was a lonely place. Nobody would be there in that particular garden to just interfere with his pessimistic state. I think very clear up to this particular point, there is no doubt. So that is why, shocked way he was speaking, what, who's that, who's that? Just look at the reply of Mr. Lamb here, just giving brief intro, highlighting that Lamb was his name. Again, he was instructing that guy to just move properly. He would be able to take care of the things while he would move. Highlighted that particular point that due to windfall, the apples were there on long grass. Yesterday I told you windfalls highlights one more meaning. That is unexpected gain. Why windfall is considered as unexpected gain? The reason behind that is he had to use his stare to just look at the apples while they used to be in crab state. Very clear up, but due to windfall, automatically he would be able to get there on the ground. They were in the long grass. I think very clear. There is no doubt in that. You are very clear. So here, that fellow wanted to give guideline. That fellow means Mr. Lamb wanted to give guideline to dairy. What was the guideline? To highlight that he could trip. Trip here means fall. Very clear. There is no doubt in that. Now let's move. I thought this was an empty place. I didn't know there was anybody here. Dash, 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 dash. Just look at the words of this guy. Dairy or Derek was literally confused. He was shocked. Already I have told you people that he could never ever like to meet anybody. While he had heard the instruction of Mr. Lamb, he was deeply shocked to observe that particular point that some human being was there in that particular garden. Just speaking like that, he thought there was an empty place. He was highlighting that particular point that he had thought that was empty place. He didn't know there was anybody there. Wanted to highlight that particular point that he was not in the knowledge of that particular point that there was somebody in that garden. I think you are very clear about the answer of this query. Read and find out who is Mr. Lamb. You are very clear. An old man, owner of the garden, very optimistic personality. No doubt he is handicapped, but he is able to recognize the basics. He is able to recognize the fact that losses are part of life. Life is not a bed of roses. So that is why he was optimistic even in his negative state. Just look at the second. How does Dairy get into his garden? Dairy gets into his garden by climbing over the wall. I think very clear. That was an illegal way of entering into the garden of Mr. Lamb. And in other words, we can use this word trespassing. Trespassing word also highlights this particular point. If we enter property of anybody illegally. Very clear up to this particular point. Now just look at the next page. Mr. Lamb, that's all right. I'm here. What are you afraid of, boy? That's all right. Mr. Lamb was able to recognize the actions and reactions of that guy. He was able to read. That guy was literally shocked. is why he wanted to console that guy. But okay, it was all right. He wanted to highlight that particular point that he was there. And he also wanted to just add to his words that why that guy was afraid of. Highlight that particular point, that was okay if he had entered in the wanted to highlight that particular point. He was consoling that guy at that moment because he was able to recognize the fact that that guy was deeply confused. I think very clear, there is no doubt in that. Then I thought it was empty, dash, 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 an empty house. Just again speaking hesitantly, deeply shocked. So that is why he was speaking like that. He was saying that he had thought that it was an empty house. And he was highlighting the same point that he had considered that that particular place was deserted place. Nobody was there in that particular house or garden. So that is why he had entered that particular place. He had highlighted that particular point. He had highlighted that particular point time and again because he never wanted to meet anybody. Think very clearly. Mr. Lamb, so it is. Since I am out here in the garden, it is empty. Until I go back inside. In the meantime, I am out here and likely to stop. A day like this, beautiful day, not a day to be indoors. Just look at this particular dialogue of Mr. Lamb. If we look at this particular dialogue, if we look at this particular point here, Mr. Lamb is little bit comical. Comics, I think you are very clear. Comical, you are very clear. So highlighting that particular point, so it is empty. Wanted to highlight that particular point that the house is entirely empty. Because he was all alone in the house. Wanted to highlight that particular point that he was out there in the garden. Wanted to highlight that particular point that at that particular moment, he was not inside the house. So that is why he was just highlighting the things in a comical way that the house was empty. Again, he was just adding to his words until he would go back inside to highlight that particular point that house was entirely empty till that particular moment again entering the house. And again, he was highlighting that particular point that in the meantime means at that particular moment, during that particular hour, during that particular time period, I am out here. To highlight that he was out there. I am out here means he was in the garden. Not to highlight that particular point that he was in the garden. And he would like to be in the garden for a long time. He wanted to highlight that particular point. Reason he had highlighted that the day was a wonderful day. Weather condition on that particular day was really amazing. So that is why he had highlighted that particular point that a day like this, a beautiful day, not a day to be indoors. Highlighted that particular point that he would never ever like to be inside the house because he was considering that particular point that was really a wonderful day. Reason behind that was weather conditions were very fine on that particular day. He wanted to stay here in the garden. He never wanted to enter into his house. Indoors. I think this word is quite familiar to you people. Indoors means inside the house. So I think you are very clear up to this particular dialogue. Here you are able to look at the character trait of Mr. Lamb. Mr. Lamb was a lover of nature. I think very clear. we look at the basic character trait here, we are able to look at that he would never ever like to enter into his house. The reason behind that was he liked weather condition on that particular day. He would never like to enter in the house. He wanted to enjoy the nature because he was a nature lover. He used to love nature from the core of his heart. I think very clear up to this particular point. Dairy, panic. I have got to go. You are very clear so far as this particular word is concerned. Panic. Well, any person is extremely afraid of. Just extremely afraid of at this particular moment. So that is why he was highlighting that particular point that he had to move out. Was highlighting that particular point that he was moving out of that particular garden. Mr. Lamb. Not on my account. I don't mind who comes into the garden. The gates always open. Only you climb the garden wall. Just look at the beauty of this dialogue, dear students. Not on my account. On my account. We look at on one's account this phrase. Literary language is there. It's very easy to understand. It means not because of him. Very clear up to this particular point. On one's account is a phrase. It's not an idiom. Should we ever ready to recognize that he wanted to highlight that particular point? It's not because of him. He wanted to highlight that if he wanted to go, he wanted to go at the instruction of his own. Here he wanted to highlight, Mr. Lamb wanted to highlight that particular point that he could never ever be able to declare that particular point. Derry could never ever be able to declare that particular point that due to Mr. Lamb was just moving on. I don't mind who comes into the garden, didn't mind who used to come into the garden. The gates always open. Only you climbed the garden wall. Just look at the beauty of this dialogue. Mr. Lamb wanted to highlight that particular point that he never wanted that guy to move out of that garden. And he also adding to his dialogue in a very positive way. He was saying that he didn't mind. What did he not mind? Just look at this particular point who comes into the garden. Wanted to highlight that particular point, the number of children used to enter in the garden. And again, he was adding to his dialogue that the gate remained open for public, for people. So just look at the next. Only Derek climbed the garden. I wanted to highlight that particular point that gate remains open for the entry of public. Never particular point in negative way. He wanted people to come and enjoy nature in the garden. Again adding that particular point that only you here means Derek or Derry climbed over the garden wall to just enter in that garden. Already I have told you, just entry in an illegal way, trespassing. I think very clear because he had entered there to think over that particular point that was deserted garden. Nobody would be there in that garden because he wanted to be away from people. Why? Because of his handicap. What was his handicap? His means Derek's handicap. He had lost one part of his face. So that is already had spoken very fine words. What does it highlight? It highlights that Mr. Lamb was very kind personality. He was extrovert. He used to love humanity. I think very clear up to this particular point. Let's move. Very angry. You are watching me. Here, Daddy became angry. Just look at his dialogue. Think that you here means Mr. Lamb. He wanted to highlight that particular point that Mr. Lamb is watching him. Because he could never ever be able to think on that particular line that somebody should observe. He never wanted that. He never digest that particular point. He wanted to be away from human beings. So that is why he had become angry and he had just spoken like that. That was Mr. Lamb watching him. He's very angry. Already, why was he angry? Because he never liked anybody to observe him. He used to feel pessimistic due to his handicap. I think very clear up to this particular point. There is no doubt in that. You are very clear. Mr. Lamb, I saw you, but the gates open. All welcome. You are welcome. I sit here. I like sitting. Mr. Lamb was just looking at the things in a very serious order. He was saying that he had seen him. You hear means you have to look at Daddy. I is Mr. Lamb. Again, he was adding to his dialogue by speaking like that. The gate used to remain open, always open. And all are heartily welcome here. I think very clear up to this particular point. There is no doubt in that. I wanted to highlight one more point. He was also welcome in that particular particular place, in that particular garden. I sit here. I like sitting. Just highlighting that particular point that he was outside. He was not inside the house because he was enjoying nature. Related that he had liked sitting over there in the garden. He never liked to be inside the house. The reason behind that was on that particular day, weather conditions were very fine. Very fine. Daddy. I think very clear up to this particular point. I have not come to steal anything. Now just look at the dialogue of Derek or Daddy. He wanted to highlight that particular point that he had not entered the garden by thinking that he would steal apples. Mr. Lamb, no, the young lad steals, crumb the apples. You are not so young. Just replying in negative, saying that yes, lads means boys. I think time says that we must close the lecture. Any doubt, any query, feel free to discuss at any moment. Thank you. Thanks a lot.